Our first question is to Rabbi Boteach. The question is, would you respond to Romans 9, 10, and 11, which clearly say that God did not replace the Jewish people, nor is he done with them, and that is in the New Testament?
Well, I stated in my presentation, and it's the mainstay of my book, Kosher Jesus, available at fine bookstores everywhere. And yes, Mike wrote Real Kosher Jesus, and I wrote really, really, really Kosher Jesus.
And I'm working on Glot Kosher Jesus.
Kosher, twice the price, half the taste. That was just a joke. I state in Kosher Jesus that at times there's a mixed message in the New Testament where, I quoted before, Jesus is approached by a Canaanite woman to expel a demon, and he says, I'm not going to take the bread of the children and cast it to the dogs. And he also says, go only to the lost sheep of Israel. So there are aspects of the New Testament where Jesus is focused exclusively on Jews. Let us remember that Jesus was a Jew who never left the Holy Land in his entire life. The mission to the Gentiles was brought about by Paul. But for every verse where Paul will say that the Jews have not been rejected, Paul seems to have a real problem with the Jews. And it's specifically in the writings of Paul that there seems to be a very strong assault on the Jews. Now, I don't expect my Christian brothers and sisters to agree with the theory in Kosher Jesus, which I state at the beginning is largely based on the scholarship of Chaim Maccabee, and I know that Mike is very familiar with the scholarship of Chaim Maccabee. But Chaim Maccabee was a scholar who sifted through the New Testament to try and show where were additions made, where were there interpolations made, especially where there are direct contradictions. I gave you an example before where the book of Acts says that the Jews are trying to kill Jesus in Damascus. And yet Paul tells the exact same story in Corinthians, and it was King Aretas who was an ally of Rome in Damascus. Clearly that was changed. I mean, unless Mike can explain it to me in a way that you and all of us, that I and all of you can understand, it's a clear interpolation that was designed to demonize the Jews. So, and of course, Paul goes through many different stages. First, he says that he's persecuting Christians. Then Jesus appears to him on the road to Damascus, and now he decides to become a Christian, or whatever it would have been called in that time. And then he says he's going to try to keep the law. And then he says the law is obsolete. And he bases his dismissal of the law in what I see as a clear mistranslation of a verse in Deuteronomy, where it says that that it is a curse unto God to leave someone hanging on a tree. And it's talking about someone who incurs a death penalty, and they're put up on a tree as a symbol to everyone about what happens. And kilas elakim toloi, it's a curse to God. That's a clear reference to someone. And why is it a curse to God for a corpse to be hanging on a tree? It's simple. Because man is created in the image of God. So God said, even if you have to use this corpse as an example to others not to violate the law, don't leave the body to be eaten by carrion and by vultures. Take it down. To all things, I become all things to all men. To those under the law, I come as one under the law. To those who are outside the law, I come outside. I am all things to all men so that I might save some. So, yes, he does say that, but it seems contradicted by so much else of what he says.
Okay. Yeah, so just very quickly, because the question was designated for Shmuley. Number one, there's no question that Christians have read Paul or other portions of the New Testament or portions of the Tanakh to say that God is finished with the Jewish people. That has been a misreading of the text that we call replacement theology that we utterly repudiate. And in my book, Our Hands Are Stained with Blood, the new edition coming out in September, it's been in print. This should mean something to you, Shmuley. It's been in print continuously since 1992. That's how much interest there is in the church. Now we're putting out a brand new expanded edition. Oh, and by the way, Real Kosher Jesus has more reviews on Amazon than Kosher Jesus, but that's just an aside. But anyway, just an aside. Okay, but there are misinterpretations of Paul, and Peter in 2 Peter 3 says that sometimes it's hard to understand what he's saying. But rather than use the approach of Shmuley and other critical scholars and think that Paul's contradicting himself from page to page, it's better to say, let's dig deeper. I can give you examples, by the way, where it's clear he's quoting from Hebrew and correcting the Septuagint or differing from it. The German New Testament scholar Martin Hengel said we can actually see corrections in the Septuagint from Paul because of his knowledge of the Hebrew. And any alleged contradictions, I can give you very simple. Look, you know the critical scholars that find contradictions all over the Torah and find multiple authors. So what we need to do is look at the really clear passages, like the passages that say the covenant promises still remain with the Jewish people. And no matter how much they oppose the gospel, they're loved on account of the fathers. And that the Messiah confirms the promises rather than cancels them. So that was Romans 9, Romans 11, Romans 15. All right, and there'll be a turning of the Jewish people at the end of the age to embrace the Messiah. Like the prophet Jeremiah said that God would be the God of all the families of Israel. So we repudiate replacement theology. Without a doubt, replacement theology has opened the door to anti-Semitism in the church for centuries, and wherever it raises its head today, we need to cut it down and say that's not what Paul said, that's not what Jesus said.
Okay.
Wait, Mike,
Thank
so
you.
does this mean, I'm so sorry, does this mean that you reject supersessionist replacement theology?
Oh, yeah, heart and soul, to the core, to the core. Let me repeat. Although there are Christians today who are not anti-Semites, who are supersessionists or hold to replacement theology, without question, historically, that theology opened the door for the brutal persecution of our people by professing Christians. And it is dangerous and it is unbiblical.
Okay, let me break in. We've gone 10 minutes on one question.
That's it?
Would you all like to come back tomorrow?
That means that's the shortest answer I've ever given on any question I was ever asked. That's incredible.
Well, that's my next point. Let's keep the answers just a little bit shorter, please. And Mike, you don't get a question. It's back to Shmuley, just because of taking that time.
Whoa, he took 8 minutes, I took 2.
I don't want to be accused of being biased.
I'm not accusing you. You are being. That's fine. All right, he needs the extra help. No problem.
I don't have as many reviews as you.
He's got a fragile ego. I know that. I know it, so we'll give him the extra help. I won't mention the height differential. Won't say anything.
Shmuley, do you accept that the authors of the New Testament were Jews in an ethnic sense, practicing a sect of Second Temple Judaism? If not, who were the authors and what is it based upon?
You want this, you know, Greg, you told me to make this very simple and short, so maybe.
Okay.
No, I mean, Mike knows the scholarship as well as any. Mark and Matthew seem to be much more Jewish books. Luke less so. John almost not at all. Paul is a mystery to me. And I'm sure Mike understands that the Jewish community till today has a very mixed feelings towards Paul.
Sure.
You know, on the one hand, I see in Paul as a Jew, and let me be clear, my Judaism defines me to my very DNA, to a molecular level. And it's just who I am. I'm not better than anyone. I'm a Jew, and that's who I am. So, on the one hand, I look at Paul, but I'm a Jew who, you know, speaks to a lot of non-Jews. And on the one hand, I look at Paul and I say, why didn't the Jewish people do what Paul did before Paul did it? Paul clearly saw something essential in Judaism that was very attractive. And the way many in the Jewish community see it, he stripped it of its more cumbersome observances, and he made it the most successful idea in the history of the world. Why didn't the Jews understand that they had a certain internationalism, a certain globalism to their faith that the whole world wanted to learn about God, that the whole world wanted to learn about the Ten Commandments, that the whole world wanted to learn about ethical monotheism. Why did it take Paul to spread this? And this is something that the Jewish community has grappled with till this very day. Till today, we remain an insular community. Christianity is a much more global community. I'm not only talking about numbers, because there's only 6 million Tibetan Buddhists, but the Dalai Lama feels that he has a message for the whole world, and his books sell to people who are not Buddhists throughout the world. But we in the Orthodox community certainly are insular, and we don't spread our message. And sometimes we get criticized for spreading the message. So on the one hand, Paul really intrigues me. He saw something very special in Judaism. On the other hand, I don't understand why he felt the need to kind of assault the Jewish people so much in order to get that message out. You just said, Mike, that you reject supersessionist replacement theology. Why couldn't Paul have taken that approach? Look, leave Judaism as it is, let the Jews keep it, but there's essential truths here that should be shared throughout the world, with people who don't want to practice circumcision, with people who don't want to keep kosher food. So, you know, I have a mixed relationship with him, and of course he was an incredible writer. Love is patient, love is kind. You're talking about eloquence that is just searing. On the other hand, when I see what he writes about my people, I get very troubled.
So I think the perspective we need to have when we think about Paul, and by the way, in Acts 21, he wasn't asked to fake it and pretend that he was living as a Jew. He was asked to show what he was doing because of the rumors that he was telling Jews to stop keeping the customs of the people. He was living as a Jew himself. When he said it to the Jews, I become a Jew, meaning I take on certain traditions and things I don't have to. He said, but with the Gentiles, I'm not under the same traditions, but I'm still under Messiah's law. But here's the thing. Two quick points. One, remember the moment. This is not 2,000 years later. This is the belief that the Messiah has come, that he's died for our sins and rose from the dead. This is the pivotal moment in our history. What are we going to do with it? This is the big thing we've been waiting for through the ages. So there's this life and death. Will we believe? Will we not believe? It's not like 2,000 years later, Judaism is doing fine, Christianity is doing fine. Why do they have to intersect like that? But the other point is this. It's because he believed that Jesus was the Messiah of Israel, that Jews could continue to live as Jews and follow him, but not subject to necessarily all the traditions, some of which they felt were contrary to God's plan and God's heart. Just like you have Reform and conservative and Orthodox, modern Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox, different expressions. The same with Messianic Jews today. But his understanding was because Jesus is the Messiah of Israel, therefore he's the Savior of the world. And that's why we have to go tell everyone. But like in Acts 13 that you quoted, when he says, I'm going to the Gentiles, what does he do to the next city? He starts with the Jews, because he said the gospel is to the Jew first. So in his mind, this is the Jewish message for the Jewish people, and he's being misunderstood as the author of replacement theology. It's a pitched battle we fight all the time. But I deeply appreciate your honesty in terms of Paul, and just keep reading him.
I bet you're next going to tell me that Paul has a lot more reviews than I do. And
No, let me clarify, because that was not a put down. Shmuly's kosher sex book has way more reviews than my commentary on Jeremiah. Way more. So it was not a put down. It was just observation. Casual.
Well, my daughter Chana is here. She lives in Israel. My son Mendy is here. He lives in Israel. And I want to thank Mendy for all the help he gave me in preparing for this debate, because I told Mendy that I want to make sure that I God forbid, never wish to offend my Christian brothers and sisters. I wanted to make my points in a way that preserved the integrity of my people, but reached out lovingly to my Christian brothers and sisters. But my daughter Chana just started the world's first kosher sex store in Tel Aviv. And the idea is that religious people really have to have a new approach to human intimacy and to marriage. And we have to strengthen and bolster marriage and respect for women. Sexuality is so broken in our time. We just see the Me Too movement and the abuse and the disrespect. And I actually think this is an area where Jews and Christians could really collaborate to restore sanctity to marriage, sexuality.
So I am 100% for what Shmuly just said, but I'm making a public announcement, the first time this has ever been heard by human ears. I am not writing the book, Real Kosher Sex. Just to let you know, I am not writing that book. You have your classic, it's out. You said it.
But you are writing Kosher Sex. Really?
All right, gentlemen, I have one question that will be the last question, I'm sure. But hopefully we'll end on a very positive note from this question. The seemingly uncrossable chasm between Jewish people and Christians has grown wider because of a false understanding about God's plan and purpose for Jewish people, exacerbated by certain statements in the New Testament. How can we bridge the gulf?
Okay, I'll go first. Here's where we agree. And I want you to know, yes, it's important for me to have this debate with the hope that Jewish people will look at the New Testament afresh and consider who Jesus is afresh. However, Rabbi Shmuley and I had a joint goal in a deeper way than any debate we've ever had, which is that as one, we would completely denounce the vile ugliness of anti-Semitism, and that we would do it as something that is utterly contrary to being a true Christian or a true follower of Jesus. We share that goal. In fact, at the end, we'll probably hug, so get your cameras out, photo op, right? Okay, but here's how we arrive at the same conclusions. For Rabbi Shmuley, it's a matter of rewriting parts of the New Testament, excising certain parts. This has been wrongly edited, but as long as our interpretation of the text is one that comes out in a way that is not supersessionist and not Jew-hating, where the whole of the people are demonized as Christ killers, etc., then I think you're
I've never believed that relationships, friendships should be based on fraudulence. And that's why Mike and I always have real debates. Kumbaya, where you just ignore or overlook essential differences, that's not real. And what you saw tonight is a real debate. And all the debates that we've had have been real debates. They've always been heated and passionate, but they've never been personal. And they've never been personal because I know that Mike Brown is a good man. And I've seen him with his family, and I know he's a good man. I know he's always been respectful to me, and I've tried to reciprocate, and he's a good man. We have essential, critical differences in theology, but we have a shared goal. And there can be no question that in our time, that shared goal is that Jews and Christians must join together to combat a new wave of anti-Semitism, which murders Jews in Israel, as it did yesterday, where a yeshiva student was murdered. It murders Jews in synagogues, as it did in Pittsburgh or Poway, California. It demonizes and delegitimizes the state of Israel, saying that Israel has no right to exist. The new anti-Semitic coinage of our time is the word occupier. And it essentially says that the Jews have no home, that you Jews are parasites. And it's exactly what the Nazis said about the Jews. Hitler's main argument against the Jews is that they're leeches, they're bloodsuckers, that they live off the fat of the German land, contributing nothing, taking everything, and therefore they should be exterminated. We've heard Louis Farrakhan call Jews termites in the past year. We've heard Congressman Ilhan Omar say that Jews deploy their resources to bribe and own elected officials to kind of take over the world, which is what it says in the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. We've heard Rashida Tlaib say that the Jews have dual loyalties, as if we're not real Americans. Same idea, right? Always the same idea. You're not really American. You're not really even Jewish because the land is not yours, you're occupiers. You're not European, you're not German. You don't belong here. And we've heard that throughout our existence. And I can say, and I have said, and I will repeat and say, that the foremost allies of the state of Israel today are our Christian brothers and sisters who have risen to the occasion to fight for Israel politically, to stand with the Jewish people against this new assault of BDS. And it's something, don't believe for one moment that the Jewish community is not immensely grateful or that we overlook it. It doesn't mean that we will overlook it. It doesn't mean that we will overlook it to the point of ignoring essential theological differences or distinctions. That's a fraudulent relationship. No one would want that. It does mean that amidst those differences, there's a deep love and bond that connects us. And I honestly wrote Kosher Jesus, as I said at the beginning of the book in the introduction. I said, I knew I would take flack from the Jewish community. To be honest, I didn't realize how much I would take. It was a very difficult year when it came out, 2011, for me and my family. Very difficult. I think, Mike, you followed it. Even you were probably surprised by the ferocity of the attacks on me. I was spending almost every day responding to vicious, vicious attacks. But I honestly wrote the book because I felt that even as we Jews understand Jesus in a completely different light to how our Christian brothers and sisters do, we reject the deity of Jesus, the divinity of Jesus, we reject the messiahship of Jesus. But I saw Jesus as a patriot who fought the Romans because of how brutal they were to his people. And that there are many fragments in the New Testament that express that love and that connection and that devotion. And I wanted to develop that. So, in conclusion, I want to acknowledge that this is a new era for Jews and Christians. It's a new era based on a common idea. And it's very flattering. The idea being that Christians say that, believe and affirm that the Jews are God's chosen people who were given a biblical claim to the land of Israel and that they deserve to live in peace in that land.
Thank you.
And I finally want to tell Mike directly and specifically that you and I have now known each other for almost 20 years, and we've shared many stages together, but it's been a bunch of years that we haven't. I want to tell you how much I enjoyed this evening. I think that discussing substantive ideas is exactly what the world needs. I think we end up speaking about so much garbage in today's culture and society, whether it's dumb movies. I like going to movies, but to sit and talk about them for hours, the presidential debates and the stuff that we see in the political arena can be really petty. And the news cycle changes almost every day, so that it's kind of transient. But the subjects that we're discussing, even if it's heated, they're eternal. They're actually really important. They cut to the core of our belief system and our convictions and our values. And that's why it matters that you came out tonight. You might disagree with me completely, and as I said before, you have the right to be wrong. I respect that. But don't believe for one moment that I take it for granted that you all come and listen and give up a beautiful New York evening where you could be in the park or doing something nice or going to a movie and instead hearing a strong debate. And Mike, I thank you for being my debate partner. I'm always impressed that in our debates you never get riled up, you never take offense, you stay very focused on the issues. That says a lot about your being a scholar who really cares about the material. And it makes a difference that we disagree. What does make a difference is that we are two fellow Jews, we are two fellow Americans, and we are two people to whom faith is the center of our lives, and we want to make the world, God willing, a godlier place and a better place.
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you very much. Let's thank our speakers. Now, if I may, I would like to thank for putting this together and to make it run so smoothly. That's number one. And second, we would like to have Mrs. Boteach to come to the stage to receive a little gift from us. So, Toby, would you help her come? Thank you. Thank you. And now, before you leave, we want to let our speakers get a chance to get to their tables and be able to greet you there. And we want you to do that before we have a lively rendition of Hine Matov Umanayim.
And a hand for our moderator.
Absolutely. Yeah.